Grab a chair and put it over there because that's the whole point. For you to sit over there if you want, or you can sit in the corner. That's up to you.
We'll see. I might eat on out, but I think that covers everyone. Perfect.
Right? Oh, you think you're I'm gonna suffer from this all. All right. Good evening. Hello. Yeah. My name's Sarab. I am one of the masters of the Moots, which is of the other master of the Moots. We organized this whole evening, which we hope will be a lot of fun. Last year's was swept away by COVID, but very excited to bring it back. In terms of what you can expect this evening is that we will have two Moots, as you all may know. The first one will run from 6 to 7:30, and the second one will run from 7:30 to 9. There'll probably be a break of about 20-ish odd minutes in the minutes in the middle.
There will be drinks and refreshments.
That's right, in the whole little break, and then everyone seems very happy, me included. And then I think that's about it. And then anything else?
In terms of housekeeping, there is one oddity. Before the judges come in, I'll say all rise. What that means is that everyone gets up as they walk up to the bench, and then we all sit back down again.
That's only once they have seated, we can sit.
Exactly. It's just a matter of courtesy.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't think there's anything else we need to cover.
No, I think we're good to go.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
And yeah,
All right, then.
we'll go sort that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All rise.
Oh, yeah. We're here to hear the case of we're here to hear the case of the New Church of Shakespeare, the Charity Commission for England and Wales. I will now hand it over to the judges to commence this appeal.
Thank you. And who's representing the appellant?
We are.
go.
Fine. We've got to sit.
How would the bench like to be addressed?
In the usual way.
My name is George Grammar Taylor, and I appear on behalf of the Appellant Counsel with my learned friend, Miss Lewis Barclay. We are also joined today by our learned friends, Miss Bramble and Mrs. Richardson, who appear on behalf of the responding counsel. Does the court wish for the facts and early decisions to be rehearsed before the court?
Yes, please. I've come into the case at short notice, so please outline the facts and let me know if they're agreed, please.
Of course, Your Lordship. So the facts of this case are that the new Church of Shakespeare was established in 1964, and their aims were to worship William Shakespeare and to promote his works. Now, in 2008, the church applied to be registered with charitable status under the Charities Act 2006, which has now since been repealed and replaced with the Charities Act 2011. The application was rejected by the Charity Commission of England and Wales and upheld by the High Court, as both instances they felt that the church was not established for educational or religious purposes in regard to charity registration. As lead counsel for the appellant, the following submissions will deal with the first ground of appeal that focuses on educational purposes of the new Church of Shakespeare. My learned friend, Miss Lewis Barclay, as junior counsel, will follow the submissions that deal with the second ground of appeal that focuses on the new Church of Shakespeare in regards to the advancement of religion. If it pleases your lordships, may I introduce the first ground and the first submission?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. The first ground of appeal is that the purposes of the new Church of Shakespeare are educational because they tend to cultivate artistic taste. And to quote from the case, the education of artistic taste is one of the most important things in the development of a civilized human being. The first submission on behalf of the lead appellant counsel is that promulgating Shakespeare's works is promoting, sustaining, and increasing the public's knowledge and understanding, thus educational and of public benefit. If I may draw your lordship's attention to the Charities Act 2011, section 2, which commences on page 10 of the appellant counsel bundle. Firstly, are your lordships acquainted with the statutory meaning of charitable purpose in the new 2011 Act?
Could you remind me of it, please?
Of course, your lordship. So as per section 2 of the Act highlighted, a charitable purpose is a purpose which falls within section 3(1) of the Act and is for the public benefit. And as you can see highlighted below, section 3(1)(b) in the bundle states that the advancement of education is a charitable purpose. If you move on to the next page of the bundle, you'll see highlighted section 4.
Which page is that, please?
The next page of the bundle, that will be page number 11.
Yeah.
And on this page 11, it introduces the main changes as enacted by the Charities Act in 2006. And notably on this page in subsection 2, the change which is critical to this case is that there's no automatic presumption of public benefit in relation to any charitable purpose. Therefore, as lead counsel today, we will seek to evidence how the new Church of Shakespeare's aim is for the advancement of education and, as required now by the new law, can be proved to be for the benefit of the public. To do this, I would like to draw your attention to page 288 of the bundle, which introduces the first common law case today, and it's analogous to this case before us. This case is Re Shakespeare Memorial Trust, reported in the second volume of the Official Law Reports Chancery series, and starting at page 398 in the year 1923.
Can I just comment? It'd be very helpful if we could have searchable PDFs in future.
Your lordships, if you go to the contents page of the Appellant Bundle Council, we have hyperlinked each case.
I'm great.
So page 2, you can click on that and it will take you straight to the authority that I mentioned to you.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, lordship.
Okay, I've got it in front of me.
Fantastic.
Which part of the case do you want us to look at?
Your lordships, I'd like to draw your attention to page 288 specifically of the bundle.
Thank you.
Thank you, your lordships. Are your lordships acquainted with the facts of this case?
No, please refresh us.
Of course, one moment, bear with me, thank you. The Shakespeare Memorial Trust was established to erect and endow a Shakespeare Memorial National Theatre with the object of performing Shakespeare's plays, reviving English classical drama and stimulating the art of acting. The court considered not only whether the trust aspects were valid under the advancement of education, but as well whether it was beneficial to the public and the local community. If you would respectfully turn I do apologise, sorry. On this page, Justice Lawrence highlights the question as to whether a charitable trust set up in the memory of Shakespeare is a good charitable trust or not. In their opinion, the Justice held that the trust is a charitable trust on educational advancement, as it consists of an educational scheme. Now, the council submits that the next page explains educational scheme, and it's quite critical to my reasoning today. So if you would respectfully turn to page 289, Justice Lawrence explains what the scheme entails. On page 289, the Justice Lawrence entails that the scheme is clearly designed to spread the influence of Shakespeare and to make more, to know more widely the beauty of his works, which is analogous to the case before us. Furthermore, the next highlighted passage is that the scheme seems to me to be one which is essentially for the public benefit. It's to produce plays of high character and to instruct the public in the art of acting. I believe it would be beneficial to separate this into two parts. First of all, focusing on the educational aspect as required by the statute. Now, in application, the new Church of Shakespeare's aim is also to promote the work of Shakespeare. And as it was held by Justice Lawrence, the council submits that this would be educational if it was to be reapplied. In regards to my learned friend, Ms. Bramble, the lead respondents, who will seek to discuss and denunciate the appellant's claims of not being educational, the education has advanced, and we have to focus on how, throughout time, there's no, apologies. Throughout the entire facts of this case before us, there are no limitations to age, gender, or any personal characteristic. Therefore, the council submits that the youth members, adolescents, even grown adults will not only learn from the promotion of the works, but also engage with them. After all, in England and Wales notably, Shakespeare is part of everyone's educational curriculum. And therefore, it's hard to align with the views of the Court of First Instance and the Charity Commission to say that the promotion of Shakespeare works, one of the leading English authors and writers of our time, is in no way educational. It conflicts with the public belief and also what we instill in our public educational curriculum.
So are you saying that any religion is educational?
In regards to religion, the council submits that a lot of this will be predominantly discussed within my learned friends' submissions, but in regards to the relation between religion and education, it's part of everyone's education, whether it be in a formal setting, but when you go through school and you learn about the different religions that we have on this world, or equally it can be in an informal setting when you engage with pop culture, when you engage with TV, or even when you engage with just reading a literature. It's part of our lives, it's immersed in all of our experiences. So there is place for every religion to be educational, because if you're not familiar with that religion, even being told and promoted how it works or what it is about, you're learning from that experience.
So why do we need any of the religious provisions for charitable status if all religions are educational?
In regards to that comment, thank you, Your Lordship, there is scope, as we have seen from the Court of First Instance and the Charity Commission, to reject on the grounds of both educational and religion, and that is why we're here today appealing to yourselves. If this was potentially overturned, there might be future discussions, as there are at the moment within the Charity Commission, of removing and adapting these charitable purposes outlined in section 3.1 of the Act. But at this time, we are here today to appeal to you because currently that position isn't permitted or allowed. Thank you. Just to quickly speak on the element of public benefit within this. The second passage highlighted on the page before you, Justice Lawrence found that it was public benefit as there was production of plays and direct teaching of acting to the public. Now, obviously and distinguishably, with the facts before us, the new Church of Shakespeare doesn't detail direct teaching or, putting on performances or plays. However, if it pleases your lordships, the lead counsel will move on to the second submission and evidence how case law suggests that cultivating artistic taste is as good as teaching with itself with regard to public benefit. Thank you, your lordships. Second submission from the lead appellant counsel suggests that the presentation of Shakespeare's works cultivates artistic taste. And as mentioned, this is much education as lecturing or teaching in a class. I would like to draw your attention to the Court of Appeal case, the Royal Choral Society and Inland Revenue Commissioners. You can either return to the contents page on a digital bundle and click on this case, or you can find this on page 298 if on paper format.
Thank you.
Are your lordships acquainted with the facts of this case?
Remind me, please.
Of course, your lordship. This Court of Appeal case focused on artistic and aesthetic education, which isn't necessarily done in a formal way. The Royal Choral Society sought to form and maintain a choir and to promote the practice and performance of choral works. This would be done through promoting choral works and the overall performance within the Royal Albert Hall setting. The highlighted passage at the bottom of page 298 highlights the context of Lord Green's view and notably introduces how it differs from the Court of First Instance. To progress onto page 299 of this mentioned authority, there's numerous highlighted passages, and being aware of time, please do feel free to read those. But I want to take you to a very important point in which Lord Green states that confining objects to the promotion of aesthetic education by presenting work of a particular kind would be educationally beneficial to the public as lecturing or teaching. And as Lord Green highlights further in this highlighted section, the Board of Education encompasses counsel for the encouragement of music and arts, and they would be surprised to learn that the enterprise for promoting music and arts is not educative. Therefore, for there to be a council to encourage participation and engaging in arts, for the new Church of Shakespeare to encourage the works of Shakespeare, one of our leading authors within the English history, it should be held to be public beneficial. If it pleases your lordships, I'll prefer to the third submission.
Please do.
Thank you, your lordships. The first submission supports the proposition that it is educationally charitable to promote works in general, and therefore it must be charitable to promote the works of a specific author. I would like to draw your attention to the case of R.E. Adelius, in particular, page 313 of the appellant bundle.
Thank you.
Thank you. On page 313, Justice Roxburgh considers whether a specific author's work is beneficial to the public, and this is very important in this case before us. And to quote Lord Justice Roxburgh in this case, the point which has been made, and it is one of interest and importance, is that first of all, this trust is not a trust for the promotion of music if it's for a particular individual composer. And this case is very interesting because equally, the new Church of Shakespeare seeks to promote the works of one author, Shakespeare. As you go down and read through the passage, Justice Roxburgh cannot concede that anybody would doubt that a trust to promote the works of Beethoven would be charitable. And obviously Beethoven being music and William Shakespeare being literature, it's hard to compare, but at the same time, the council submits that it is analogous. And the more aesthetic appreciation of music is achieved, the more reputation will necessarily be enhanced. And that poses a really interesting question in regards to motive and purpose, because you do not want to confuse the two in regards to establishing a charity. And therefore, if your lordships turn to page 309, Justice Roxburgh addresses this point because many, including the Charity Commission, have raised concerns about personal artists or one single author being promoted. Is it educational or is it a personal gain? And in page 309, Justice Roxburgh states that it's impossible to see how anyone could profit from promoting a residuary legacy. Shakespeare being passed, obviously, as a residuary legacy, is a literary figure who became one of the greatest in English literature. And therefore, all that the new Church of Shakespeare is seeking to do is to further and perpetuate his works. With the Charity Commission denying the application and the first court of instance, the new Church of Shakespeare are unable to fulfill their aim, which is to do with promoting the works, making more people well known. And in regards to this, I believe the following can be concluded. With the requirements set out in the Charities Act 2011, we require that the advancement of education must be for a beneficial purpose to the public. The council submits that the advancement of education in this situation does advance on the basis of education. As outlaid in the common law, the promotion of works is seen to be educational, and that was seen both in 1923 in Rees Shakespeare Memorial Trust, it was seen in the Court of Appeal in 1943, and it was seen in 1957. Therefore, the lead appellant counsels please respectfully ask the court to overturn this ground of appeal on the basis that it conflicts with current law, and more so than ever, current common law before us does suggest that promotion of Shakespeare's works is educational in purpose. If there are no further questions, I would like to thank your lordships for your time.
I do actually have a question for you.
Please do.
So if you look at the facts of this case,
Yes.
the purpose is worshipping of the man they call the bard and promulgating his works. So I'm going to take on.
Of course, your lordship.
Worshipping the man they call the bard and promulgating his works. So you wouldn't put worshipping the man they call the bard under the heading of education, would you?
The council submits that specifically for this, that would fall under the advancement of religion.
Okay.
The worship element of that.
So
yes.
the promulgating the works.
Yes.
And you may not be able to help me with this, but if you could, it would be very helpful. What would you be doing to actually promulgate his works? Because from what we've been told in the facts, the society at the moment attends the RSC in Stratford, seeing performances, etc. Do they put on performances? Do they publish his plays? Do they hand out free copies of the plays? What are you actually doing to promulgate?
My client, as before entailed within these facts, has not explicitly stated what they will do or the processes and how they will do it. However, I think this council submits it can be inferred through their actions of attending the place of where Shakespeare was renowned to be in Stratford-upon-Avon, in regards to taking them to the Globe theatres and using those as the places to educate them of the surroundings that the theatre and the works grew up in. And more so, the sonnets and plays are considered to be the Holy Scripture and therefore a documentation that is going to be present and prevalent to all. So when they join or even inquire about this charity, if established, they'll be exposed to the most prominent plays and sonnets of Shakespeare, and that in itself and receiving those could be educational. It's a purpose by itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, your lordships. I will now hand over to my junior council member, Miss Lewis Barclay.
Good evening, your lordships. As my learned friend has said, my name is Miss Lewis Barclay and I appear on behalf of the appellant as junior counsel. I will be handling the second round of appeal, which concerns the fact that the new Church of Shakespeare was indeed established for the advancement of religion, because a religion need not involve the worship of a god. With that, if it pleases your lordships, I will begin my first submission. I would like to bring your lordship's attention to page 11 of the appellant bundle, the Charities Act 2011, which is highlighted in yellow.
We have it.
The legislation states that those religions that do not involve the belief in or worship of a god are also included in the umbrella of religion as recognised by law. This one sentence of legislation is enough to satisfy one of the Charity Commission's previous grounds of refusal on the basis that the new church does not worship a deity. It's important here to consider the wide range of religious practices that we recognise in the UK. Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism are all examples of religions that do not worship an entity in the traditional sense. Buddhism particularly actually rejects the idea of God or a creator figure in its teachings. We also have in the UK a very old and ancient traditional form of religion, which is known as paganism or sometimes Wicca. This can involve anything from the worship of the cycles of the seasons to some people refer to it as magic. And these are recognised also as religions within the UK, which is further to the point that despite it not being a non-human deity or entity that the new church is proclaiming to worship, nonetheless, there are plenty of religions in this country that are recognised without having a god, as it were. I also believe a stark comparison that could be drawn here is that of Jesus and Shakespeare. These are two human men, both leaving a legacy of their relative teachings. And Christianity has a following of over 2 billion worldwide.
Sorry, what did Shakespeare set out to do in writing his works?
So, thank you, Lordship. It is submitted that Shakespeare, or the Bard as he is known by the new church, set out to tell stories, to bring awareness to moral messages through his plays. There's also a lot of Christian imagery that appears in the plays. So it's submitted that his intentions could have been educational, moral, perhaps both. It's hard to tell, obviously, as he's not here, we cannot ask him.
So where do you classify Oberon in this?
Overall,
Oberon, yes.
well, it's interesting because there is a lot of sort of political commentary. It is submitted that there is a lot of political commentary that appears in the plays about tyrannical leaders. Obviously, there's spiritual, mythical messages too. So I suppose it could be said that each character might represent something Shakespeare saw in society, which he then wanted to bring attention to.
Thank you.
So although Shakespeare might not fit in the narrow definition of deity that the Commission spoke to 13 years ago when they rejected the application in 2008, it cannot be said that he is not considered to be supreme in some way within the worlds of literature, culture, and the arts. Although not a god, Shakespeare is hardly revered as a mere man. His work has stood the test of time, and it is an important part of our culture to this day in 2021. As my learned friend has mentioned, Mr. Grammar Taylor, his works form an important part of the education system, and there are still hundreds of professional productions of his work every single year in the UK alone.
Could you just help us with the meaning of the act? So you clearly identified that you don't have to have a god
Yes.
for something to be a religion. So how do you define a religion as compared to, say, a political belief? You know, what makes Shakespeare worthwhile as a religion compared to, say, Karl Marx?
Thank you, Your Lordship. So the key in terms of the legislation comes down to the worshipping and what counts as worship. This will be explored more in my next submission, as that is where the line would be drawn between, as Your Lordship said, something political and a spiritual or religious belief.
What about Blake? Overtly religious, hymns and the like. John Donne, of the similar age to Shakespeare.
Your Lordship, may I clarify, are you asking me whether...
What makes Shakespeare special compared with any other towering figure of literature? And I appreciate this isn't an English literature class.
Well, there are many answers to that question. Perhaps his influence, it's still seen, you know, widely in the UK and worldwide. Productions, there was a believe it was a Supreme Court exercise with the US Supreme Court, where they actually had a trial and used the facts of, forgive me, your lordships, I can't remember which case it was, but they took one of Shakespeare's plays.
Merchant of Venice.
Precisely, they took The Merchant of Venice and made a court case from it. So it's very prevalent in a way that I'm not aware that those other authors or poets that you mentioned are.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Not sorry, your lordship. Thank you. If it pleases your lordships, I will now move on to my second submission. The Charity Commission's 2008 decision regarding the new church now contradicts both the position of the court and the latest legislation. I would like to direct your lordship's attention to the case of R and Registrar General of Births, Deaths and Marriages, beginning at page 317 of the appellant bundle.
Thank you.
Would your lordships care for a summary of the facts of this case?
I'm happy.
No, please just take us to the relevant.
Of course. Specifically, I would like to draw your attention to page 329. And the passage highlighted is Lord Justice Buckley's definition of practices of worship.
Okay.
The new church does consider themselves to worship the bard in various ways. As are outlined in the facts of the case, there is a pilgrimage to his final resting place every year on the anniversary of his death, 23rd of April. There is a system of clergy, as there is mention of high priests and also priests just generally. There is also extreme care taken of first folio editions, which are held to be sacred works. This is demonstrated by the use of the gloves. It is submitted that the gloves also bear a parallel meaning and are another example of the veneration specifically towards the bard's father, as he was a glove maker. So they wear ornate gloves to pay homage to him. It's obvious to draw parallels with pilgrimages to things like Islam, where that's a big part of their religious practices, and also the protection and preservation of these sacred texts. It is submitted that this is a display of worship.
But you've directed us to Lord Justice Buckley. Can you please take us to what aspects of the activities actually satisfy the characteristics of worship?
So Justice Buckley speaks about being humbled and respecting the power of the objects. And again, it is submitted that through the care of sacred documents, through the veneration of the bard's father, it is a form of humbling and submission towards these artifacts.
What's the difference between submission and veneration?
Veneration is a form of showing, I suppose a word used to be adoration, whereas submission would be admitting that that thing or person is higher than you or more important, which I think leads back into this idea of the supreme thing that might be worshipped in order to be counted as a religion. If I could now direct your lordship's attention to the passage on page 337 of the appellant bundle.
Thank you.
This acknowledgement of the widening of the meaning of religious worship is the crux of the judgment here and what makes this a landmark Supreme Court case, as it moves past the narrow definition of worship that the Charities Commission exercised in their rejection of the new church's application. And also it's pertinent to point out that this case is to do with the Church of Scientology. They also made an application of charitable status, which was also rejected on quite similar grounds. So where the Charities Commission had refused to recognise the practices of either church as worship, the judgment here and also the new legislation has the scope to override this meaning that the Commission used when making these rejections. The finding also indicates that if the Church of Scientology should choose to reapply for charitable status, they would most likely be successful. I think it is submitted that it's important here to draw on the parallels between the basis of the Church of Scientology and the basis of the New Church of Shakespeare. It is submitted that this comparison is rather short, as it stops after you consider the fact that both L. Ron Hubbard and Shakespeare are authors. It is submitted that if the Church of Scientology, which is based upon the writings of a pulp fiction Scientology, science fiction even, I beg your pardon, author, who was a convicted fraudster and a wanted man at the time of his death, if a religion based upon this would be most likely successful in law in an application of charitable status, it would make sense from a cultural and it would make sense from a cultural position to allow the new church also to achieve charitable status.
You say it's most likely to be successful in law. Has it been successful so far?
They have not reapplied as of yet, Your Lordship.
So they'd be relying upon this as precedent for their own application.
They may well be, yes.
So how are we meant to decide based upon a party that is not here and that we're not here to judge?
The submission is more to draw the parallel and say that if one would now satisfy the legal requirements, even though it is based in something far less culturally important and somebody who has had far less influence historically, then it is right that it should be granted to my client in this case.
But it hasn't been granted so far to the
No.
Scientologists, has it?
No, it hasn't.
So it's not a comparator yet, is it?
It's not, which is why the council is seeking to draw upon the parallels within the religions rather than using the law.
Can you help me with paragraph 63 on page 337?
Yes.
Is it the purpose or intention of the society to conduct marriages at Stratford-upon-Avon before or during performances?
As far as the facts and what my client has informed the council of, we're not able to say yes or no to that. It is a possibility.
So no,
I can't definitively say yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Your Lordships.
Thank you.
If it pleases your lordships, my name is Miss Bramble. I appear as lead respondent for the client. I will be dealing with ground 1 of the appeal, which states that the purposes of the New Church of Shakespeare are educational because they tend to cultivate artistic taste and the education of artistic taste is one of the most important things in the development of a civilized human being, as stated in the case of the Royal Choral Society and Inland Revenue Commissioners, to be found in Volume 2 of the All England Law Report 1943. My learned junior, Mrs. Samantha Richardson, will be dealing with ground 2 of the appeal. My lordships, with your leave, I'll now begin to my submissions. The respondent's skeleton argument can be found on page 4 of the bundle.
Have it.
My first submission is that the appellant does not train, research, or develop an individual's capabilities, competencies, or skills when disseminating the bard's works. My lordships, please can I take you to page 91 of the bundle?
Okay.
On this page, you'll see some writing in a blue highlighted box. This here defines what the courts have found educational in the past. Would you like me to read it out for the court?
Just what does this document come from, please?
It's called the Charity, it comes from the Charity Commission. It's called the Advancement of Education for the Public Benefit, and it was written in 2011.
Thank you.
Here, there are 4 elements as to what can be deemed as educational. These include 1, the increasing of knowledge and abilities of those being educated. 2, the development of memory and spatial awareness. 3, physical education and the development of young people. And 4, the increasing of public learning and knowledge about a particular subject. Elements 1, 2, and 3 listed here are clearly not established by the appellant. The grey area would most likely be found around element 4, but I still submit that this is not satisfied.
How are you saying that we're bound by this document?
My lord, it works off public benefit 1 and public benefit 2, and for the sake of the limit of authorities in the bundle, I found this authority to be more helpful to me and in keeping with our 6 authorities.
But this is the opinion of the Charities Commission, isn't it?
Yes, and it works off the terms, it says at the front page of the document, which I will take you to. States it works alongside the Act, the Charities Act 2011, and for the sake of time, I'm struggling to find it.
Okay. But you're not going to refer me to any case law.
I will do
You
eventually.
will, that supports these propositions. Fine,
So with your leave, I may carry on.
please.
So the grey area would be found around element 4, but I still submit that this is not satisfied by the appellant either. This is because no more than mere critical appreciation of previous works is experienced in the appellant's group. The Royal Shakespeare Company and the Globe Theatre are the principal cathedrals and the new church, and Shakespeare's plays and sonnets are the Holy Scripture. Here, there is no indication of critical debate over Shakespeare's works. There is no apparent mind training. There is certainly no indication of physical education. And in terms of public learning, one can assume this practice is even open to the public, but it appears an adherent or a vardalator merely appreciates existing work rather than advancing an education.
Is this an increasing understanding of the English language?
I'm sorry, please.
Isn't increasing an understanding of the English language sufficient for these purposes?
Thank you, my lord. I would agree that that does fit within these criteria, but I don't think the appellant does increase an understanding of the public's language, because the understanding that one would develop through the appellant's group is an understanding that can also be gained online. And as my learned friend for the lead counsel for the appellant stated, it's already in school curriculums.
Thank you.
Please may I direct you to page 92 of the bundle.
Okay.
Paragraph 3 on the left-hand side of the page states that in general, to advance education means to promote, sustain, and increase individual and collective knowledge and understanding of specific areas, studies, skills, and expertise. My learned friend, lead appellant, in their skeleton argument states, mere promulgation of Shakespeare's works is enough to promote, sustain, and increase the public's knowledge and understanding. But I submit the purpose of education is not as simple as this. This is because the appellant at best tends to know more than to persuade the public that worshipping Shakespeare's works is a good thing. My lord, please can I take you to page 11 of the bundle? At the bottom of page 11, you will see a green highlighted section that goes over onto page 12.
Yeah.
Here, Justice Harman is proposing that pushing the public to believe that something is just and a good thing, or in this case, mere worship of the bar, and this is all is a good thing, is not enough to amount to education. As stated previously, all the appellant does is appreciate the existing works of Shakespeare. There is no critical appreciation of his works apparent in the current facts of this case. I remind the court that the appellant has not succeeded in gaining charitable status under section 3(1)(b) of the Charities Act thus far, because the Charity Commission hold education does not include mere non-critical appreciation of the existing store of human knowledge. I submit that the dissemination or promulgation of useful knowledge is what makes a charity educational, not the promulgation of knowledge already established in society or that can easily be found online. With your leave, my lordship, this concludes my first submission and I'll move on to my second.
Please.
The second submission states that in the alternative where the appellant is found to satisfy section 3(1)(b) of the Charities Act 2011, they do not satisfy section 4 of the Charities Act 2011. Please may I direct you to page 77 of the bundle. This section explains the public benefit requirement. The particular part that is relevant to my argument is section 4, subsection 2. Would you like me to read it out for you?
Please.
This states that in determining whether the public benefit requirement is satisfied in relation to any purpose falling within section 3, subsection 1, is not to be presumed that a purpose of a particular description is of the public benefit. I highlight this to you because it is not to be assumed that the public benefit requirement is met here merely because the appellant may carry an educational purpose. But I respectfully submit that whether this purpose exists or not, the public benefit requirement must still be established. Please can I direct you to page 104 of the bundle. On page 104 of the bundle, you'll see part of the document from the Charity Commission on the advancement of education for the public benefit. I draw your attention to paragraph 3 on the left-hand side of the page that states that the benefit for the public should be capable of being recognized, identified, or described. Paragraph 7 of the same page at the bottom of the bundle states that if the benefit cannot be shown by evidence that a subject or process is capable of being educational, benefit will not be proved. I submit to the court that there is no form of evidence showing that the appellant is educational. I respect that quantifiable measurement is not necessarily essential here, but there is no indication of a consensus or objective and informed opinion, thus meaning it cannot be proved as educational at this stage.
So, stepping back from that a second, how you've mentioned Royal Choral Society and Land Revenue. How do you deal with the submission that's been put by the appellant that an artistic endeavour, someone notable, so be it choral music of itself, and an appreciation of choral music is of itself educational? So how do you address the notion that actually of itself, promulgating Shakespeare is educational?
So, thank you, my lord. When I brought up the Royal Choral Society case earlier, I was merely repeating the ground of appeal. But I would also argue that developing one's artistic taste fits in the criteria I laid out in my first submission, the increasing of knowledge and abilities of those being educated. I imagine if you don't know how to paint or you don't know how to be artistic or sing, and you're taught how to do that, your knowledge is developed. But merely rereading Shakespeare's works,
But
where,
is that what happened in Royal Choral Society?
my lord, I can't answer that question because I've not relied on Royal Choral Society in my submissions. With your leave, I carry on.
Please do.
One could argue, however, that this particular area of education is certainly niche, but is still beneficial to the wider public. However, I submit that this is still not the case. Please may I direct you to page 105 of the bundle.
Yeah.
On paragraph 3 on the right-hand side of the page, under wider or remote benefits, this states that an aim to educate a limited group of people would only count as beneficial if a sufficient section of the public is educated. This sufficient element is defined on page 108 of the bundle. Please may I take you there.
Thank you.
On this page, principle 2B states that where the benefit is to a section of the public, the opportunity to benefit must not be reasonably restricted by geographical or other restrictions. It clearly states in the facts of this case that every adherent must visit the Bard's tomb on the anniversary of the Bard's death. His tomb is in Stratford upon Avon, so my predicament here is what about those who cannot travel? For example, those with disabilities, financial difficulties, work commitments, illness, or what does one do during COVID-19 lockdown or isolation? The list goes on. My point here is that all of these people are reasonably restricted from being educated by geographical restrictions, emphasizing that the appellant cannot be granted charitable status because of those who benefit are limited. If I can be of no further assistance, your lordships, this concludes my submissions that the first ground of the appeal is to be dismissed by the court, and with your leave, I will now hand over to my learned junior, Mrs. Richardson, who will be dealing with the second ground of appeal.
Thank you.
With your leave, I will begin. The second ground of appeal. If I can refer your lordships to page 4 of the bundle, the respondents bundle, I will be starting with the first submission that the appellant does not fulfil the belief system when referring to the advancement of religion. Council will be relying on the Gnostic Centre Charity Commission. Would my lordships require a brief summary of the Gnostic Centre?
Please.
So the Charity Commission had rejected an application for charitable status from an organisation that promotes an ancient mystical belief system called Gnosticism. The Gnostic Centre, which is based in Leeds, applied to be a charity with the possible purposes of advancing education, advancing religion, or promoting the moral or spiritual welfare or improvements of the community. However, in an internal review carried out by 2 of the regulator's board members, the Commission upheld its earlier decision to reject the application. The board members agreed that Gnosticism possessed some of the legal qualities of a religion, such as a belief in a supreme being, but did not promote a positive, beneficial, moral, or ethical framework because it focused too narrowly on the spiritual welfare of individuals. If your lordships could turn to page 22 of the respondents bundle, I will be using point 21 through to point 23.
And what's this document we're looking at?
This is the Gnostic Centre application.
Mhm. Who determined the application?
The Charity Commission.
Thank you.
Starting at point 21, the advancement of religion falls under section 2, subsection 2C of the description of purposes in the 2006 Act. The word religion in the Charities Act, section 2, subsection 3, part A includes A religion which involves a belief in more than one God, and 2, a religion which does not involve a belief in God. The board reviewed the summary and the law and the guidance in the advancement of religion for the public benefit and the analysis of the law underpinning this, and applied the principles and approach in their consideration. It is considered that the characteristics of a religion for the purpose of the charity law are, and I will summarise for time in court, belief in God, a relationship between the believer and the supreme being by showing worship, a degree of seriousness, importance and cohesion, and finally an identifiable, positive, beneficial or moral or ethical framework. Starting with point A, there is no belief in God. Point B, although there is a form of worship, there is no more than the one anniversary a year. It could be seen that there is not an ongoing supervision to see that their members remain constant in the religion that they might profess. Point C, the level of importance, seriousness and cohesion can only be decided by your lordships. The Charity Commission and we as council would argue that there is only a degree of importance to the members of the New Church of Shakespeare and not to the wider community. Point D, when referring to this final point, we found the charity to be neither positive or negative, ethical or unethical. We would respectfully request the court see that when referring to the belief system set out in the Gnostic application, the only criteria the appellant fulfilled was part B, and even then they failed to fulfill it completely. If I may, your lordships, move on to my second authority. Council will be relying on South Place Ethical Society, which was a case heard in the Chancery Division in 1980. Would you require a brief summary?
Please. Could I have the full reference, please?
Just a moment. So, apologies, Your Lord, I don't appear to have it.
Carry on.
So the court considered the meaning and nature of religious belief and whether a trust for this purpose could be charitable. Lord Justice Dillon referred to Lord Justice Russell as having taken the view that the court could hold that there are purposes so beneficial or of such utility to the community that they ought prima facie to be accepted as charitable. But he observed that this approach was difficult to adopt in view of Lord Simmons' comment in William's Trustee. Religion requires faith in a God and worship of that God.
Can I stop you there?
Yes, of course.
How does that remain relevant since the passing of the 2006 Act?
I think the relevance, thank you, Your Lordship, is the council will be relying on the faith in a God and worship of that God are important to our argument today.
But doesn't the 2006 Act specifically state that you do not have to have belief in a God to be a religion under the Act?
Yes, it does state that. In one of my authorities I've used, it states that religion necessarily entails a belief in God.
So you're saying that the 2006 Act should be ignored and the statutory provision stating that you don't have to have a belief in God should be disregarded?
No, Your Lordship, thank you. What I'm saying is that I think today is about deciding which interpretation to take of this, as there's 2 points in the Charities Act. So a relief which involves a belief in God and a religion which doesn't involve a belief. And what we would like to argue is that a religion which involves a belief in God is more important than one that doesn't.
Are you saying that a religion that does not involve a belief in God cannot be a charity within the meaning of the Act?
No, your lordship.
Okay. Please go on.
If I could take your lordships to page 33 of the respondents bundle. This is the first page of the case that I will be referring to. So if I could take you to page 40.
Thank you.
Council will be starting on the second paragraph, starting at there is a further point.
Please go on.
There is a further point. It seems to me that two of the essential attributes of religion are faith and worship. Faith in a God and worship of that God. This is supported by the definitions of religion given in the Oxford English Dictionary 1914. Although I appreciate that there are other definitions in other dictionaries and books, the Oxford English Dictionary gives one of the definitions of religion, a particular system of faith and worship. Then, recognition on the part of man of some higher unseen power as having control of his destiny and as being entitled to obedience, reverence and worship. The New Church of Shakespeare has not shown any signs of worship in regard to obedience or reverence. As stated before, they only worship annually. Moving on to the Charities Act 2011, which can be found starting on page 77 and on page 78. Section 2 states that religion includes a religion which involves a belief in more than one God and a religion which does not involve a belief in God. My counsel across the bar has relied on subsection 2 of this, in which a religion does not involve a belief in God, but myself and my senior counsel would rely more heavily on subsection 1, a belief in God, because religion necessarily entails a belief in God.
So you're saying that the two are seen together rather than alternatives. How is that supported by the wording?
I think that it's a thank you, Your Lordship. I think it's a contradiction. I think it's a difficult point.
How?
Because a religion which involves a belief in more than one God, and then a religion which does not involve a belief in any God, makes it quite difficult to.
But what are their alternatives?
Thank you, Lord. Such as alternatives, such as.
As a religion can be belief in a God, multiple gods, or no God at all, and it can still be a religion.
I think that when looking into whether to apply charitable status, it's difficult when there's no belief in a God that it could open up.
Well, let's say I'm against you quite firmly on the notion that there has to be a God. How do you then define what is or is not a religion?
I'm unsure that I can assist you with that, my Lord.
Can I interrupt?
If I may move on to my next submission.
Please.
In the event that the New Church of Shakespeare did fall within the belief system, they would still fail the public benefit test. Council will be drawing on the Charity Commission report, the Advancement of Education, and Gilmore and Coates, the 1949 case heard in the House of Lords. Would you like a summary of the facts in Gilmore?
Please.
In Gilmore and Coates 1949, the Carmelite Priory was a convent comprising of an association of nuns. The nuns devoted themselves entirely to worship, prayers, and meditations within the four walls of their cloister. Moreover, the nuns didn't engage in any activities outside of their cloister, regardless of whether it benefited anyone outside their association. The main issue was whether the Carmelite Priory could be regarded as charitable trust or not. The court held that because the nuns were living away from the public, They did not make any public benefit, and therefore the Carmelite Priory could not be considered charitable. If your law could turn to page 48 of the respondents' bundle.
Yep.
In the yellow highlighted section, it was held that the purposes of the Priory were not charitable. The element of public benefit is essential to render purpose charitable in law, and this applies equally to religious as other charities. The benefit of intercessory prayer to the public is not susceptible of legal proof, and the court can only act on such proof. Further, the element of edification, by example, is too vague and intangible to satisfy the public benefit test. If your lordship could now turn to page 53.
Thank you.
Would you like me to read the last paragraph on the page due to court time, or?
No, we'll read that ourselves.
Okay.
Briefly, what is the point you take from that?
It is that religion by itself is not charitable any more than education is by itself. So in support of my senior counsel's application that they're not for the advancement of education, I'd like to say that without the education, they cannot satisfy on just a religious advancement.
Thank you.
Moving on to the Charity Commission report, if your lord could turn to page 87. With your leave, I would like to read the principles for the court's benefit. With reference to principle 1A, it is not clear what the benefits are to the public when considering religion. So principle 1 is that there must be an identifiable benefit or benefits. So 1A is it must be clear what the benefits are. In response to the appellant, it is not clear what the benefits are to the public for the advancement of religion. My lord, I will now move on to my final submission and conclude the respondent's case. Council will be relying on the United Grand Lodge of Ancient, Free and Accepted Masons of England and Holborn Borough Council, a case heard in the Queen's Bench Division in 1957. Would you require a summary of the case?
Please.
If you could turn to page 66, I'll start here.
Okay. I'll give you just another minute.
Okay, thank you, I'm grateful. I will start from point 2 from where it was held.
Given the time, can you just summarise the point you want to make?
Okay, so in the Freemasons, there was no religious instruments, no program for the persuasion of unbelievers, no religious supervision to see that its members remained constant in the various religions, no holding of religious services, no pastoral or missionary care. Council would like to point out the similarities between this case and the New Church of Shakespeare, in that other than their annual worship, there was no other religious activities involved for the advancement. Advancement is promotion, and there's no promotion of this religion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You wish to respond?
We do, your lordship. But may we have one moment outside to discuss? Is that be permitted?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, lordship. Thank you for your lordship's that momentary moment of leave. May we draw your lordship's attention to page 79 of the respondents bundle. This outlines the authority that they have used predominantly throughout their entire submissions of the Charity Commission guidance. On this page at the top, and I quote, the 2011 guidance from the Charity Commission is currently under review. It no longer forms part of the Charity Commission's guidance on public benefit and should now be read together with 3 other public benefit guides, not in isolation. This features throughout and notably in isolation within both submissions from Ms. Bramble and within Mrs. Richardson's second submission.
Thank you, I have the point.
Thank you.
But could I ask you to address page 66 of the bundle, the respondents bundle, and the Freemasons case?
One moment, your lordship. Yes, which part of page 66 of the bundle?
You would have a quick read of where it's held, and please tell us how you differ from the Freemasons.
The Freemasons case is held in the Queen's Bench Division and therefore within the High Court jurisdiction. Being in the Court of Appeal, we're not bound by this case or what it is stated. In regards to the responses from this, our appellant counsel have used Court of Appeal authorities which would override and supersede the ruling within this case, this court. Thank you, lordships.
This concludes the appeal. Judges will now take their time to consider and hand down the judgment later. Court is now in recess. Rise.
Well done. Well done, guys. Mad respect. So weird. I can see you getting excited by your fucking way. It is so easy. Everything went up. Every time you ask me a question, I was I don't know where those this is my dad, this is Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Sorry to interrupt. Well done.
Thanks.
Can I get my bits out in advance? Is that stop telling me to breathe into the I just basically just wanted to check. Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's a cool track because the guy.
I mean, it is.
Everything you need to do.
No, no, of course.
Whereas obviously we have to-
Oh, yeah, okay, we didn't put that in.
If it were the law, then it would be part of it. So that's not in the bond. But yeah, that was good.
Got the other.
So it rather than- rather than doing it,
Oh,
so I think-
maybe you have to stop waving. Oh, please, you're the last person who can speak. I'm watching this, I find I'm narrow. I found out.
No, yeah, you can-
You told public law with. You can only make a decision on the easy application. And you can't, this is an appeal against an application. When it's standard principles of regular activity.
whatever conflict with the authority.
May it please the court, I am senior counsel for the appellant Amias Perry. My learned junior counsel is Huda Bulhan. And may I equally present our learned opposing counsel, senior counsel for the respondent Hannah Potiphar, and she's accompanied by her learned junior, Ms. Sarah Gardner. Before I begin, would my lords like a brief summary of the case?
Very briefly, thank you.
So the appellant GFH is a fashion house launching themselves at London Fashion Week. The appellant contracted with the respondent, Western Fabrics, to manufacture their garments for this display. A contract was agreed that the respondent would manufacture these garments out of 100% panache, a material that is 65% silk and 35% linen. A high percentage of silk in all their products is a cornerstone of the brand of the appellant. Upon delivery, the appellant discovered that the garments manufactured by the respondents were not in fact made entirely of this material, but the inner lining was made of a different material, exquisite, which is of a lower percentage of silk and creases more easily. It later transpired that the respondent used such material because whilst they had panache, they had sold it on to a third party and made a profit of £20,000.
What is the difference in the silk content?
Exquisite is 60% silk and 40% linen, a 5% difference. So GFH, the appellant, brought an action for cost of cure to remedy the defect by having the garments completely remade by another manufacturer at the cost of £200,000, and also brought action for account of profits for the £20,000 made from the sale to a third party. The High Court ruled on behalf of the respondent, and the case was dismissed by the Court of Appeal. GFH is appealing on both counts, on both grounds. My apologies. To you. With your leave, may I begin my submissions? Thank you. So this case regards the fashion industry. In that industry, it is a widely known fact that reputation is highly prized. A contributing factor to one's reputation in the fashion industry is the appearance and quality of their garments. The respondent's breach of contract in using different materials to those agreed upon led to a substantial difference in the appearance and quality of those garments. The aesthetic appearance of these garments is relevant. This display is being used by the appellant to launch their brand. And so any inferiority in the appearance of their garments can have a damaging effect on their reputation and as such their future ability to make profits from sale. The lower percentage of silk in the material used by the respondents for the inner lining of the garment led to an inferior product. And if this product was displayed by the appellant at London Fashion Week, it would have a detrimental effect upon their reputation.
Was expert evidence led to that effect at trial?
I'm afraid I don't have that available.
Is it agreed that it's an inferior product?
The appellant submits that it's an inferior product. The change to the design and the manufacture was made without the knowledge or agreement of the appellant. Based on that fact, we submit that the argument of the appellant in this case is supported by the High Court's judgment in the case of Freeborn and de Amil, forgive me, Freeborn and de Amil, Almeida Marcau. Got it, actually. You can find that on page 6 of the appellant bundle, and I'm referring to section 140 and 141. In that case, the defendant, an architect, substantially changed the design for a room without consulting the complainant. That led to a structure that was substantially different from that expected or envisioned by the complainant. It was therefore ruled reasonable for the complainant to pay for that structure to be demolished and rebuilt, and for damages to be awarded for the cost of doing so. We submit that that argument is also relevant here. The appellant further submits that we are aware of the House of Lords judgment in the case of Ruxley and Forsyth, that we believe the respondents have submitted as an authority. However, the appellant submits that the particular context of this current case is different from that one due to the intention of the appellant. The appellant in Ruxley did not have an intention to use the damages, if they were awarded, to remedy the defect caused by the defendant's breach of contract. It was thus reasonable not for the court in that case not to award the cost of cure. The appellant GFH has, however, displayed an intention to remedy the defects in the garments so as to achieve the appropriate appearance for London Fashion Week. Their reputation is at stake, and so it is justifiable for them to do so. It is, in addition, reasonable to expect a contractual agreement to manufacture garments from exclusively a specified material to be upheld. Do my lords have any questions?
Yes, may I just ask factually, because it wasn't clear from the outline, has GFH actually spent £200,000 or has it not done that? Has it? Yeah, that's the
Sorry, if I
question.
just may have a moment to consult the facts of the case.
The facts say that GFH would have to spend 200,000.
Yes.
But do we know if they have in fact spent that money, or they're sort of writing this off, as it were?
I believe in reference to the facts of the case, GFH have not yet spent that money on remedying the defect, but do intend to. Sorry, are there any other questions? In that case, that concludes my submission, and I defer to my junior counsel.
Your Lordships, if I may address the second point of appeal, that no accounts of profits should be awarded in the circumstances this case does not fall within the principles laid down by the House of Lords in A. James Blake. My first submission is that the case does fall within the circumstances laid down by A. James Blake. The court should regard the knowledge that Blake obtained and wrongfully sold to a third party to enrich himself as a commodity. Western used the same knowledge that they would profit by entering in a more lucrative contract with another fashion house, GFH, Giovanni, which is Giovanni Fashion House, in bad faith, with no intention of fulfilling the contract that they had agreed upon with, sorry, Your Honor, I mean, Your Lordship. If I may have a moment to
Of course you may.
gather myself. Could I repeat myself? The case does fall within the circumstances of the principles laid down by the House of Lords in A. James Blake, as the court should regard
the knowledge Blake obtained and wrongfully sold on to a third party to enrich himself as a commodity. Weston knew that they would profit £20,000 by entering into a more lucrative contract, and therefore.
Is that an agreed fact, or are you asking us to infer that to be the case from the circumstances?
To infer that. The purpose of damages is to put the innocent party in their original position had the breach not happened, and to award damages for any inconvenience suffered by the innocent party. Therefore, Weston should be stripped from their wrongful profit of £20,000. Additionally, Weston should also be made to pay £200,000 to reproduce the garments for their wrongful profit.
Is that not double recovery?
Yes. Lord Reed in Morris and Gardner one step proposed that loss should not be considered strained or artificial. In the present case, it is clear that GFH would have to reproduce the garments at an additional cost of £200,000 on top of the £350,000 that they had already spent with the initial contract. Therefore, we are proposing that Weston should reproduce the garments and award GFH for the £20,000 for inconvenience.
Could you just take me through the figures? So how much did they pay for the garments in the first place?
£350,000. The agreed upon contract is that they would be using panache, which is 65% silk and 35% linen.
And then how much are they paying for the garments to be manufactured by a third party?
To reproduce them,
Yes.
Lordship, they would have to pay £200,000 to reproduce the inner linings with panache rather than exquisite, which is 60% silk and 40% linen.
So it's just the inner linings,
Yes,
not the whole garment.
I believe so.
Okay.
As the facts of the case suggest.
Thank you.
Do your lordships have any other questions?
Could you take me through the legal principles and the case law?
To which case?
Blake. Could you actually take me to Blake, or is there anything in Blake that you would like to identify?
I think what we would like to identify is that just the facts of the case and how similar they are to the actions of Weston. Blake is identified to be an exceptional case. However, we feel that the actions of Blake and the actions of Weston are too similar for Blake to be identified as an exceptional case, because really they do the same things. They both enter into a more lucrative contract. They both profit from it. So what we are proposing is that Weston does not gain their profits and shouldn't be allowed to basically gain their profits. And we don't believe that Blake is an exceptional case.
Can you just clarify? Sorry, you referred to the principles laid down by the House of Lords in Blake. Could you just run me through those principles?
My apologies, I don't have that at present case. I apologize.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, my lords and my lady. My name is Miss Hannah Potiphar, and I appear before you today on behalf of the respondent in this matter. I shall be outlining the first ground of appeal, and I shall be submitting two submissions. My first submission will relate to why the cost of cure, in this case, the cost of replacing the garments, is inappropriate in the circumstances. And my second submission will outline where in its place loss of immunity damages are appropriate, and thus that the decision of the Court of Appeal should be upheld. With your permission, I will proceed to my first submission.
Please.
It is submitted that the cost of cure should only be awarded where it is reasonable in all the circumstances to do so, and the cost of doing so is not disproportionate to any benefit. To outline this point, I'd ask the court to turn their attention to the case of Ruxley Electronics and Construction Limited and Forsyth, which is reported in the Appeal Court Law Reports in 1996, beginning at page 344. With time in mind, may I ask the court to dispense with formal citations moving forward?
Yes, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you, my lord.
Do you have the page number of the bundle?
Yes, my lord, it begins on page 20 of the bundle.
Thank you.
This case was mentioned by my learned friend. Would you care for a brief summary of the facts?
Please.
Yeah. So here, Mr. Forsyth contracted with Ruxley Construction to have a swimming pool built in his back garden. The contract specified a certain depth that this swimming pool should be for the purpose of diving, and upon completion, the pool was shy of this originally contracted depth. As such, Mr. Forsyth brought an action for damages for the cost of rebuilding the entire pool to the specified depth. The House of Lords held here that the cost of doing so was disproportionate, and in its place awarded damages for loss of immunity. It is submitted here that the facts are relatively similar to that of the incident case. There appears to have been a mild breach of contract, which has left the injured party without a benefit to which they should have received under that contract. To outline how the court came to the decision in the House of Lords that the cost of cure was disproportionate, I'd like to outline a few considerations that the court made. The first is that of the seriousness of the breach and its consequences. If I can ask the court to turn to page 20 of the bundle, there are some highlighted sections. I'd ask the court to read the first and the third highlighted section, the first beginning a man and the second beginning where the contract.
So perhaps you're going to lead on to this, but are you know, the difference between these passages is that one is talking about a sort of aesthetic
Indeed.
Loss of some kind, whereas are we talking about that sort of situation here? Are we talking about something which is more like the third of those paragraphs, which is more about
Indeed.
Something more substantial?
Yes, so there is a differentiation to be made between where a breach of contract causes the entire object of the contract to fail, and one where the purpose has been fulfilled but for, and I quote, merely the lack of aesthetic pleasure. It is submitted that in the first instance, when the breach of contract is so defective that the purpose of the contract can no longer take place, there is little argument in saying that the cost of cure is inappropriate. However, if you'll note at the bottom of page 20, there's another small sentence highlighted that outlines that actually when a substantial amount of the contract has been completed, the position is very different. And indeed, in Ruxley, the position was very different. The cost of cure was held to be disproportionate. In Ruxley, apart from the depth being shy of the specified depth, everything else was up to specification. Mr. Forsyth had a fully functioning swimming pool.
But aren't we dealing with chalk and cheese here? So in Ruxley, let's say that you were asked for a dress of a certain length, and
Indeed.
it was millimetre difference, then I could see how that would be a Ruxley type case.
Indeed.
But what if you were, what if I went to a jeweller's and I asked for a diamond encrusted watch and they gave me a Swarovski crystal encrusted watch? Aren't there some products which are substantially different, and the actual material itself
Indeed.
is the essence of the contract?
Indeed. And this is where the facts of this case are important, because apart from the lining, everything else was up to scratch. And the purpose of this contract was for an exhibition, for a catwalk, where the lining was of less importance. And that's looked in that perspective. Really the substantial amount of the contract had been fulfilled. To the outward eye, looking at these garments, they were up to specification.
And you had expert evidence to support that?
There was no expert evidence to support that, but indeed there's no expert evidence to say the other way, and thus inferring from the facts that the outer of the garments was indeed up to specification. That is all we have to go on today.
But isn't, on the fact that we're given, the fact that they are more liable to crease means that their appearance is different to what they should have been?
Indeed, exquisite does crease more, but from the facts we know that panache creases a little, and thus without that expert evidence we really only have those two things to go on.
But again, isn't it like the Swarovski crystal and the diamond, that you're not dealing with, you know, somebody walking along in a high street fashion? You're dealing with high fashion here, aren't you? Top end garments. And are you saying that that level of difference is inconsequential?
No, my lord, I'm not saying it's inconsequential. It's just not substantial enough to award the cost of cure. Indeed, there has been a breach of contract here and damages should be awarded, but it should not be so substantial as to the amount of cost of cure. To add to this point,
so you're not taking the Voxley position that actually no damages should be awarded at all, because
in Ruxley damages were awarded, that or loss of immunity. And I will touch on that in my second ground of appeal. But if I may just continue with my first, apart from this relatively minor breach of contract with the lining, and indeed the fact that GFH still had garments to present at the fashion show, the breach of contract had not completely impacted the direct objective of the contract. I'd ask the court to look at the second consideration taken into account in Ruxley, and again turn to page 20, and this time the middle quotation which begins his loss. Just give the court a moment to read that. May I proceed?
please.
It appears prudent to mention here the purposes of damages in contract, which is well secured in law. They are to place the breaching party in the position as far as money can, had they been in, had the breach not occurred. It is also necessary to mention what damages are not for. They are not to overly compensate the injured party, nor are they to penalise the breaching party for that breach. In the House of Lords, as outlined by that quotation, they were concerned that had Mr. Forsyth been awarded the cost of cure, he may have been unduly enriched. And so this should be a concern of the court today. In addition, if there is any doubt in your lord and lady's minds as to whether the cost of cure would be reasonable, I'd ask you to act with caution with this due to policy reasons. If you allow damages today, the precedent that you would set for lower courts is that when the breach is not overly significant, and indeed when the breach does not impact the very objective of the contract, cost of cure damages can be awarded. In light of this, I'd like you to look at Lord Bridges' observation in Ruxley at page 15, the section beginning, I suspect. It is submitted here that Lord Bridge made the observation that often parties in this case choose not to litigate, but to end there and to make discussions outside of court. With awarding such a generous award today, you potentially open the floodgates to claims for injured parties when they see that they can potentially have this great gratuitous benefit. Indeed, it also runs the risk of damages in contract becoming punitive to the breaching party, something that the law has no interest in. Indeed, briefly, looking at the time before I move into my third submission, I'd just like to quickly touch on the consideration of intent. My learned friend for the appellant has tried to distinguish Roxy on the basis of intent, and it's submitted that intent of itself is not enough to mean that cost of cure should be awarded. It still needs to be reasonable. With the interest of time, if it pleases the court, I'll now move on to my second and final submission.
Yes, please.
Yes. My second submission, following on from the first submission that cost of cure is not appropriate, outlines that loss of immunity damages here are. In Roxley, it was held that the cost of cure damages were not appropriate, nor were the difference in value damages not appropriate. And that indeed is why the Court of Appeal in that case awarded cost of cure. They saw no other option. However, this was reversed by the House of Lords. As counsel for the respondent, we are aware that damages for loss of immunity are normally only awarded where the very object of the contract is that of peace of mind or relaxation or pleasure. And on its face, it may appear that the facts of this case are not such an instance. In response to this argument, I'd ask you to look again at the case of Roxy, and at this point to the thoughts of Lord Bridge on page 36 of the bundle. There is quite a substantial highlighted section here. I'll just give you a moment to read. It begins, "What is then?" My lords and lady, may I proceed?
Yes.
It appears here that Lord Bridge is outlining that the law of damages should not be so inflexible, that there should be a middle ground allowed on the basis that purely the injured party has a disappointed expectation here, and that in itself should be enough to award some damages. He goes on to mention that lower courts would have a precedent for doing this, and in turn mentions the case of G.W. Atkins Limited and Scott, which is included in the respondent bundle at page 79. The facts of this case are somewhat important. I'll just briefly summarise given time. Here, Scott contracted with some builders to do some work in his property. The work of great importance was tiling in a lavatory, particularly around a bathroom. He felt they were defective and sued for damages for replacement, but the Court of Appeal only awarded damages for loss of immunity. The replacement, again, was out of all proportion. It is outlined here that on its face, loss of immunity damages don't appear in the traditional sense to apply here. We're dealing with a contract for tiling in a lavatory, and it is admitted that no purpose of that contract can be for pleasure or for relaxation, and instead is that of necessity. And as such, the terms here of loss of immunity And as the court refers it, damages of bad workmanship are used interchangeably and appears to be a way of the court of almost by the back door allowing these damages which Lord Bridge mentions of.
If the tiling is not for aesthetic or pleasure, then why does everyone not just have standard or bog standard tiles?
In Atkins, they were indeed bog standard tiles. They were white square tiles, and they're around a bath for necessity. If it had been on a wall in a fancy pattern, it may have been different, but they were around a bath, they were white, and they were for necessary purposes.
But these are all construction cases, or this is all about construction.
Indeed.
This is a commercial context, isn't it?
Indeed.
Is it? Do different considerations not apply?
The precedent that you have the ability to set here would apply for everything and would make the law fair and not inflexible, as Lord Bridge states, that people should be allowed to receive damages for this loss of a benefit without unduly enriching the party with cost of cure and without penalising the breaching party.
So are you saying that if we uphold the lower court's decision, that by doing so we're setting a precedent?
Yes.
So are you saying that the lower court was treading new ground?
No, but the lower court is going off the Ruxley case, and as Lord Bridge states, there is a little bit of ambiguity here which you have the opportunity to make clear and to make sure that the law of damages is not inflexible in the future. Unless I can open the court further, this ends the submission on
No,
behalf.
thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Potterwell. Swap you in those. Thank you, Miss Potiphar. If it pleases your ladyship and your lordships, I'm Miss Sarah Gardner and I appear on behalf of the respondent today on the second round of appeal, which is namely that no account of profits should be awarded as the circumstances of the instant case do not fall within the principles laid down by the House of Lords in Attorney General and Blake. My lady, my lords, I wish to make two submissions on behalf of the respondent today. The first is regarding the aforementioned principles for awarding account of profits for a breach of contract as held by the House of Lords in Blake. In essence, account of profits should only be awarded in exceptional cases and where ordinary remedies for breach are inadequate. The instant case concerns an ordinary commercial contract, which has none of the exceptional features of Blake, and for which my learned senior has already made out the case today that other remedies were indeed available and appropriate in the circumstances. In my second submission, I will argue on behalf of the respondent that the parties' intentions are in fact irrelevant. There is no good faith requirement in English commercial law, and the fact that the breach in the instant case was deliberate and allowed Western Fabrics to enter into a more lucrative contract elsewhere is not a good enough reason to be awarding account of profits. If it pleases my lady and my lords, I will begin my first submission. Thank you. So I may draw your attention to the case of Attorney General and Blake, found in the first volume of the appeal cases from 2001 at page 268. May I ask the bench if it's appropriate to forego formal citations?
Yes.
Thank you. The facts of this case really are truly exceptional. The defendant, Blake, was a traitor. He betrayed betrayed official secrets to the Soviet Union while in the security and intelligence services and was sentenced to prison. He later escaped to Moscow in the mid-60s, where he later wrote a tell-all autobiography for which he received large payments and was due another large payment. The Crown argued that Blake should not gain from his treachery, and the House of Lords majority held that in this case, an award of account of profits was a just response. Lord Nichols, in the bundle at page 100 in his speech, paragraph E, it's the highlighted page, page 278 of the report, but 100 of the bundle, mentions the established basic principles that damages should be compensatory in breach of contract as they are in tort and in interference with property rights. He then goes on to acknowledge that there are some circumstances where the strict application of this principle would not do justice between parties. And skipping ahead a little to page 107, Lord Nichols continues at the highlighted paragraph next to the marker G. This is where Lord Nichols lays out the principles for awarding account of profits for breach of contract, which crucially state that account of profits are appropriate only in exceptional circumstances. Normally, a remedy for damages or specific performance or injunction, coupled with a characterisation of some of the obligations as fiduciary, are an adequate response to breach. And again, goes on to reiterate that it's only in exceptional cases where remedies of this kind are inadequate that any question of account of profits will arise. So it's important for the court today to consider what makes Blake so exceptional. There are two main limbs to this, your lords and my lady. The first is the context of the security and intelligence services. The defendant committed deliberate and repeated breaches of his undertaking not to divulge official information.
Can I stop you there?
Of course.
Can you turn to page 108 of your bundle?
Of course.
And it's at E.
Where Lord Nichols references Lord Wolfe.
Yes. And there are three facts which would give sufficient grounds for departing. You can't just have one on its own, but the three are the fact that the breach was cynical and deliberate. Are you saying that the breach here was not cynical and deliberate?
The breach in Blake?
No, in this case.
I deal with that in great detail in my second submission, but with your lordship's permission, I will move on to that and address your point directly.
If you could, please.
Of course. At the paragraph that your lordship mentioned, there are three facts which should not be sufficient ground for departing from normal damages for breach, all of which are directly analogous to this case. The fact that the breach was cynical and deliberate, the fact that the breach enabled the defendant to enter into a new, more profitable contract elsewhere, and the fact that by entering into that contract, the defendant was unable to form the original contract. And it's not contested that Western Fabrics did breach the contract deliberately by entering into a more profitable one to sell the panache to Formosa S. And in doing so, they were unable to perform their full contract. But it is submitted as that none of these are a good enough reason to award account of profits.
On their own?
On their own.
Would you agree with that assessment, that it's on their own, but if you take them together, then would that not be a good reason to say that this falls into the exceptional category?
How I've read it, your lordship, is that there are three facts. It makes no mention of all of these. Lord Nichols himself does agree that none of these facts would by itself be a good reason for ordering an account of profits.
And does that not infer that if you take them together,
I am now seeing
that they could give an exceptional basis?
If they were taken all together, there is potential for your lord to find that today. However, there is a lot more to what made this particular case exceptional and how it is distinguished from the facts of the instant case.
But in this case, aren't all three of these aspects satisfied in this case?
They are, your lordship.
So if they are, would that not put this into the exceptional category, even applying Blake?
It could have the potential, depending on the facts, to do just that, my lord. However, as my learned senior has expressed, forgive me, just a moment to think. It is submitted today, my lord, that on the facts of the instant case, while they do resemble the elements that Lord Wolfe and Lord Nichols were agreeing upon, they are not in and of themselves, even put together with all three of them, enough for this case to be considered exceptional in nature in the way that Attorney General Blake was. Even taken all together, it's simply not enough. It's not exceptional in the context of an ordinary commercial contract.
Okay, I drop you, please.
Thank you. No, not a problem. And more on that exceptional nature, this security intelligence service, the defendant committed deliberate and repeated breaches of his undertaking not to divulge this official information. And it was the Crown's whole case that they had a legitimate reason in preventing Blake from profiting from his treachery, and there should be no incentive for others to follow. There was, in addition, the element that Blake had committed a criminal act in breaching the Official Secrets Act. And in this exceptional case, the Attorney General was entitled to bring civil proceedings in aid of the criminal law to uphold the public policy, ensuring that criminals do not profit from their crime. Secondly, regarding the exceptional nature, we have fiduciary relationship. And at page 109 of the bundle, Lord Nichols elucidates that while, paragraph F, my apologies, while the Court of Appeal upheld the first instance ruling that Blake's relationship with the Crown was not in fact fiduciary, and this was not challenged in the House of Lords, Blake's undertaking, if not fiduciary, was akin to fiduciary, according to Lord Nichols, for which account of profits is a standard equitable remedy in the event of a breach. And Lord Dean later goes on at page 144 of the bundle to clarify that the reason of the rule applying to fiduciaries applies to Blake also. So we have the context of the Security and Intelligence Service, and we have this relationship that is akin to fiduciary. It is submitted today that the context of the instant case is an ordinary commercial contract with no heinous crimes risking national security being committed and no damage to the public interest. There are no features of a fiduciary relationship between Giovanni Fashion House or Western Fabrics demanding their loyalty, for which an account of profits may be appropriate. This was also applied later in the case of Lux Holding Limited and Midland, which begins on page 185 of the bundle. The pertinent facts here are that a company had breached an agreement to sell its shares to a particular purchaser by selling to a third party at a higher price. The court granted a freezing injunction. However, they also considered a claim in the alternative for account of profits. And while I appreciate, of course, being the High Court, that this is persuasive only, it gives us a more recent application for a more analogous set of facts. Here at page 202 of the bundle, Mr. Justice Roth highlights that the sale and purchase agreement in Lux was an ordinary commercial contract, as in the instant case. The breach of this nature is not unfamiliar in business affairs, where sellers break contracts to deliver because they take on more lucrative contracts elsewhere. There is no reason in principle why the ordinary compensatory measure of damages should not apply. And that if the claimant can show that the contract price was less than the value of the goods, or that there was a particular commercial benefit which cannot now be obtained, as could be fairly argued by my learned friends in this instant case, then that can be determined as a measure of their loss, subject of course to remoteness. And Mr. Justice Roth does go then on at paragraph 55 on the next page, 203, to state that as Lux is concerned, a claim for an ordinary breach of a commercial sale agreement, it has not shown a good arguable case that it falls into the exceptional category. And it is submitted today that there is no arguable case that the breach in question before the court today falls into the exceptional category. This position was clarified by the Supreme Court later in 2018 in the case of One Step, and Morris Garner, which begins on page 122 of the bundle. The facts of this case are not largely relevant. However, they largely concerned a breach of contract under the principles of negotiating damages. And it was held that as these are not compensatory, they could not be justified simply because it was difficult to quantify financial loss or because it was considered a just response. But essentially, the Supreme Court were limiting the availability of negotiating damages to exceptional cases. And at page 103, in Lord Reed's conclusions in the bundle, at paragraph 11, which I believe is by the market E, Lord Reed, very importantly here, reiterates the position from Attorney General Blake. He reiterates that the common law damages for breach of contract cannot be awarded merely for the purpose of depriving the defendant of profits made as a result of the breach, other than in exceptional circumstances following the Attorney General and Blake. So in summary, this is an ordinary commercial contract, which is not exceptional in nature, and ordinary damages for breach are both adequate and appropriate. And unless your lordships have any questions, and ladyship have any questions.
Yes, could you please turn to page 202 of your bundle?
Of course. Yes.
And you've highlighted this. Obviously, time is limited.
Yes.
But is the point that you would be making on this that actually they would have had a better claim on the basis of a known commercial benefit, as this was going to be used at Fashion Week?
In order that I may direct your point more concisely, would you mind elaborating further, please, my lord?
Is this their big flagship event?
For Giovanni Fashion
Yes.
House. It is a big flagship, excuse me, it is a big flagship event. And as my learned senior has elucidated, the difference between what was delivered and what was agreed upon in the contract was so minimal, and included a 5% difference of silk content on the lining of the clothes. They were not made for sale to the public. They were purely for demonstration purposes. And while it is acknowledged that there was a breach of that contract and they entered into a more lucrative contract elsewhere, those reasons are simply not enough to award a count of profits, because the differences were very marginal in the circumstances. I haven't answered your question, have I?
No, you haven't.
I could tell that from your.
You've nicely sidestepped it, so that's fine. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask essentially the same question. So in the interest of time, I will not, but perhaps the appellants may wish to come back on to you when it's their turn on that point, because it was a point that they had made themselves, which was about reputational loss rather than a sort of more generic commercial loss.
I think I appreciate the question now, thank you. If I may briefly respond to that, that would be a very valid concern had the breach been had the breach been significant in any way, so as to render, for example, the clothes useless and no longer fit the purpose. For example, had Western fabrics manufactured entirely in exquisite and not used panache for the outer layers and only used exquisite for the lining, then there could potentially be, of course, my lord, an arguable case that they were just simply not fit for purpose for this important flagship event. However, with such a marginal difference, and with it being a fairly common business practice to breach contracts, and enter into more lucrative ones elsewhere. Time, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Respond.
May we have a moment to discuss?
Yes, you may.
Thank you very much.
200,000 on this, it's a fraction of this, millions of pounds.
Sorry, I briefly misplaced what I had written down. My lords and ladies, we submit that the issue here is not just of the fact that the garments are of a slight aesthetic difference to those of the agreed design. We submit that due to the breach of contract, the garments are no longer able to perform their primary function, that is, of representing the brand identity of the appellant at this fashion event. So we submit that it is reasonable to award cost of cure in this case, as it's not just an aesthetic difference, it actually impacts on the function of the garment. In addition, apologies. In addition, had the breach not occurred, the appellant would not have to have spent an additional £200,000 to get those replaced. That is a clear, unambiguous loss made from the appellant. So the rebuttal to junior counsel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes the appeal. The judges will deliberate and hand down the judgment in a short time. All right.
Can we see?
It was better when I read it on
It's quite bizarre. It's quite bizarre.
I mean, it wasn't.
You never know what questions they ask.
I'm saying, I read that
Has someone dropped their phone?
I'm free. I'm free.
I just noticed that laptop being recorded.
Yes, maybe that's.
Yeah, me too. Something else to make. It's very friendly, but I'll be like,
Whatever.
actually, yeah.
It was indeed. It was,
Thank you.
I'm not going to give a judgment because all of these have been chosen because to some extent they're moot and there is never a right answer. In fact, every time I ever give advice to a client, I always say to them two things. Firstly, you get 5 different lawyers, you'll get 5 different answers. And secondly, any lawyer who tells you that something is 100% is an idiot, and you should sack them immediately. So the only rule of thumb when you come to practice as opposed to doing law academically is as long as you're not breaching the code of conduct and you're not allowed to mislead the court, you're there to shape the arguments to your best of your ability in favour of your client. And you all made a really good stab at that. Overall, in terms of the first moot, the advocacy style that the respondents had, you've got a very nice persuasive style, the way in which you addressed the court, the fluency of the way in which you presented yourself was very, very good. In terms of the appellants, you went a little bit, the senior appellant went a little bit too fast, rushing through things. That's actually something that I do a lot in practice. And it's when you're wanting to get your points across. Stylistically, you need to slow it down. But actually, sometimes when the courts have got limited time, you really do have to gabble and get it across. You, as the junior counsel, you had the hardest time in terms of the questions we put to you, but you dealt with that really well.
Thank you.
But overall, what decided the winner in the first moot was the structure of the argument. And remember, it's actually, in some respects, simpler. You just go back to basics, and the basics is looking at the statute and saying, what does the statute say? Statute beats everything. And if a statute comes in, then you might look to some authorities in the past to interpret aspects. I'm a property specialist, and so constantly when you look at the rent tax, there was one case I did up in Swansea about the 2 homesmans test. And I got out this, and it was before the days of computers, it was all done in hand. A3 sheet, literally it would cover this whole table. I got it all photocopied, and I went through colour over what happened at what particular point, at what stage the act changed, and what the authorities said, because you find frequently things will get repeated over and over again, then you can refer to a new authority. But the mistake that was made was that the 2006 Act was to actually intended to get over the very point you were arguing, which was you don't have to have a belief in God in order to qualify as a religion. There were other points that were well made, but for me, that's what decided it. And in terms of argument, that, in my view, is where the appellants pipped it. And what finally tipped over the balance was your response when you came back and you pointed out that the authority that you were relying upon in terms of the guidance from the Charity Commission was under review. The last point I would say on the Charity Commission is you've got to look at what your authorities are. And it's one of the things that I learned very early on in practice is that you have a tendency of reading the textbooks, you have the practitioners' books, and some are treated, as Bibles. But actually, when you start reading the case and you read the commentary, there's frequently a mismatch. And what you're getting is another lawyer's interpretation of that. And you always have to go back to the highest authority source material. So everything that was said by the Charity Commission would have been based upon other case law. And I would have ditched the Charity Commission and found what cases they were referring to and relied upon them. But because of the structure of how it was argued, you were more fluent, but your legal argument and structure was more powerful and persuasive, although I'm not saying that you're right. Your overall argument wasn't particularly attractive. And the Freemasons point would have been your best line of attack. And just to correct one thing you said, of course, the appellate courts are not bound by the lower courts, but it doesn't stop those lower decisions being of interest and authority, especially if that judge has gone on to be even more significant. But I find for the appellants as the winning team on that. So the appellants. Individual winners when we
we'll go through it. Thank you.
So with judging this, before we came in, I had to declare an interest, and we've kept it so that I don't know which of your teams are Sussex and which are Brighton. And part of that was we were meant to have a full-fledged panel here, and I was brought in as head of annex of 1 Crown Office Row as a last fill-in for a Farquhar who couldn't make it. And in the past, I've only judged internal Sussex routes because I went to did my CP at Sussex, and then for a time sat on the court of Sussex as well. But another interest that I've also now found out I've got to declare is one of my nieces, and I've got 16 nieces and nephews, so we've got everything covered. But one of them is actually one of the world's top fashion designers. So I knew a lot of what you were saying, which is why I picked up on the fairly unfair point for you. She went straight from St. Martin's to work for John Galliano at Christian Dior. Managed to survive him getting kicked out within the first year of her working there, and climbed up the ranks of Dior to then be headhunted by Vera Wang in New York, to then get headhunted by Caroline Herrera, and then get headhunted by Oscar de la Renta. The great shame that we don't say is that actually the Trumps wore her dresses to the inauguration. But we keep that's been a first thing. But again, in terms of trade secrets, I can't tell you the exact figures, but basically I know how much it costs to make a dress that they actually do at things like the Paris Fashion Week. And the point, which maybe hadn't been appreciated by whoever drew up this particular case and looks at it, was that your best route of attack would have been to say that there was a known particular customized market and that it would have damaged your reputation, because frankly, dresses that were costing 300,000 to make this sort of thing would have been retailing at probably something in the region of 15 million. So actually the impact of what was being done, you can forget how much it cost to make them. That wasn't the real argument, but that's special pleading, special knowledge. In terms of the presentation, with your presentation, look, it didn't go in the way that you wanted it to, but that happens all of the time. You get really, really nervous when you go. And I've been doing this job for close on 30 years. And we all get those horrible days. I went in front of the Court of Appeal on a case where I won at first instance, went in front of Jan Luber at Central London County Court. And he's just brilliant. He's done all the main housing cases to the Supreme Court, and he now is a property specialist civil judge. And he went against me on appeals. We lost an appeal, but he said, I would give you permission for a second appeal if I could, but I can't. But I can see the power of your arguments. So we applied for second appeal to try and reverse back again the decision, and got it on the papers at first instance, with basically the Lady Justice saying, you're right, this is completely new ground. The other side brought in Philip Rainey QC, who's brilliant. I led one of my colleagues in Chambers, and the day before the appeal, we were told it was going to be in front of the Master of the Rolls, and it was being live streamed. Now, I've taken on Rainey thinking, we've got this. That added all the pressure on. And then you've got an appellate court, which maybe because the argument we were running was going to tear up the rule book and had some really bad consequences. But we were running an argument that the County Court Act and the Civil Procedure Rules should say the same thing, because the Civil Procedure Rules come from the County Court Act. But in a previous decision, Court of Appeal decision, they had actually decided that the meaning of trial for the rules was different to the meaning of trial for the County Courts Act, and in a landlord and tenant case in forfeiture, it just caused havoc. And so the Court of Appeal, much as you had today, it was as if I was talking nothing, in fact, like today, because it was as if I was talking a foreign language, and they were just giving me this blank, and the whole day was spent with, we just don't understand you, Mr. Siddle, what point are you making? And you all have those days where it just doesn't come together. The fact is that you cannot be a good advocate unless you have the nerves and unless you have the failures. The one under Chatham House rules that I would say is I even had an instance when I was first on my feet, when I started talking to the solicitor on the other side, and I thought I was taking instructions. It was only about half an hour in that we both realised that we were actually on the other side of the case. And then there was like conspiracy of silence, and of course we were always negotiating, but nothing ever said. But it's by the matters that don't go so well that you learn from it. And the thing that is the biggest factor in going to the bar or becoming an advocate is actually, if you really want to do it, actually standing here and doing it in the first place is the most difficult thing that there is to do. And 30 years on, I still get absolutely petrified before you start. And if you don't perform. It's just about handling the fear and then channeling it. But, you know, if you haven't got the fear in the first place, you might as well forget it, because you might sound eloquent, but you won't be getting the points across. In terms of the arguments, I thought that your performance was very good, very persuasive, and was powerfully made. I chucked things in your way and you went across those arguments and dealt with them in your stride. It was really a very, very good performance on both your parts. In fact, I couldn't put, you know, a paper between you in terms of how those performances came across. The only thing I would say, which I'd pick up from your first one, your bundle was beautifully prepared.
Thank you.
Remember, you can teach old dogs new tricks, because I used to do all my legal research in books and thought, I can't get it. And then quickly, as a chambers, we moved online with our libraries and have extensive libraries. And you get to the point where one day you think, well, I don't want to see a book. I can only do it now online. And then with bundles, you know, I used to go to court with, in fact, there was one case in the upper tribunal recently, but I say recently, before the whole lockdown, where I actually had to hire a van to take up 6 boxes of lever arch files, and I sticky everything. And by the time you stickied everything, nobody can remember what the stickies are. And so you can spend your whole time searching for it. In lockdown, the great thing was we all moved to electronic bundles. And then you quickly learn how they work. And having a bundle that's easy to access, that has the tabs, is really, really helpful. The other thing that was helpful was the colour on highlighting the relevant parts you wanted me to go to, which both teams had. So that's a very, very useful exercise, because my one criticism, everybody, is your skeleton's going to be better. And the real world, you can win or lose a case on your skeletons. You persuade, you know, frequently judges are so busy, they're not going to read everything. But the one thing they will always read is a skeleton argument. And in that skeleton argument, you get your punches in and you try and persuade them, because you can swing a judge back your way if they're not with you, but it's much, much harder than going with the judge and having them on board. So in terms of the second moot, I thought you did well, and there's lots to build on there, but I'd give the moot to the respondents. In X Factor style, if I could ask the winning teams to come forward. So at the seats, so you remain seated.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, no one's available. Sorry.
So as you know, there are 2 prizes of £125 each for the winning or the mooters outside of the competition that we consider to have been the best from Crown Office Row. And also we're offering 2 mini pupilages with us. I suggest that you leave the mini pupilage as long as you can whilst the courts get up and running. A mini pupilage across the ether is not nearly as good as in person. But the 2 winning mooters are from the respondents team in the second moot. One of the advantages of having the head of annex of One Crown Office Road here is I get to make the rules. So I was so impressed with the performance that the winning team from the first moot, we're going to invite you both to have a mini pupillage in One Crown Office Road as well.
Yeah.
Off by saying, it was a really close run thing. And I think that all 8 of you, if you want to go to the bar, should still pursue that ambition, because all 8 of you showed real promise and represented your universities tremendously.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I
was just going to say you're going to say a few words.
Oh, sorry. No, I just have thank you. I just have a few words of thanks, really. Firstly, obviously, to Simon for giving up his evening and being such a fantastic presiding judge and giving such beautiful feedback, which I think is a lesson for all of us academics in terms of how to give constructive feedback that looks to the future. That was fantastic. So thank you to you and to Richard earlier this evening from One Crown Office Road for your incredible generosity with the many pupillages and as well to the shields, which we'll be engraving. I don't know if we have both of them here or that's just one example.
Yeah.
Sorry, we only have one shield because it's 2 years. 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll be holding that here and hopefully we'll be fighting again for that in a year's time. Does it then revert to being held in Brighton? Yeah. Is that the idea? So we look forward to seeing you, or some of you at least, in Brighton around about this time next year. I just have a few other very super quick words of thanks. I know it's late and there's some drinks to be had. First, thank you to Gina from Brighton for gallantly stepping up and being a judge at the very, very last minute. So thank you, Gina, and also thank you for your organisation of mooting at Brighton. In terms of the organisation of things at this end, on the academic side, I want to thank Craig, who is over here, and James, who is over here. And Vanessa, who isn't here, who has been helping hugely with mooting at Sussex, and who is also from One Crown Office Road, and as well to Fiona Clements, who was also involved with some previous stages.
I'm just waving at Fiona. She's
just waving. Oh, Fiona's there. On the professional service side, I'd like to thank Mel for everything for this evening. In particular for your introduction to Montebello's Sicilian cuisine, which has gone down a storm, at least with everyone that I've spoken to, so we can give them some positive feedback from this evening. Sicilian restaurant Hove, open for business. Yeah. But also many thanks to Barry and to Jane, I think. Jane, many thanks for organising. And last but not least, a quick thank you to Tristan, who is over here, who does many things to help with mooting, but not least tonight, you helped set up all the technical side of things so that our audience at home have been able to join us this evening. And last but not least, to Surav for your timekeeping. And your Master of Ceremonies this evening. So thank you very much, Surav, not just for this evening, but for everything that you do for mooting at Sussex. Drinks, photos, whatever, cigarettes outside is also permissible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for speaking to me.
Well done. It was a pleasure. You deserve it.